everyone, and welcome to the Air and Salt podcast. I'm your host, Richard Arsenault. Thank you for joining me. In this podcast, we're going to discuss myriad eclectic issues, and those issues will include film and television, my experience, 25 years or more professional experience in the film and television industry, and then many years before that as an independent filmmaker, and also the concept of brains and minds and artificial intelligence and social media and gossip and Grand Theft Auto. So let's begin. I'm recording this on Friday, November 17th. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, or Indigenous People Day. As someone who has some Native American blood in me, I appreciate the concept. I've got Micmac Indian in me, which is actually Canadian, not American. I'm a foreigner, and my people came from Prince Edward Island, but of course also from France and stuff. So they got some European going on inside me, and who knows what other stuff. I've never had a DNA analysis, but the point of the matter is I've actually been interested in all these different kinds of topics, from artificial intelligence to history to science to the multiverse, for quite some time. And I started listening to podcasts actually with Lex Fridman. He was interviewing, I believe, Michio Kaku. Is that how you pronounce the wonderful physicist's name? I actually bumped into Michio down at the Orange County Fair years ago. He didn't know that I was who I was, but I knew who he was, and I thought that was an interesting experience. And it's interesting, we bought some lottery tickets at the California lottery ticket booth, and man, every one of them won. So that's an interesting side story. But I'm learning. I was on college radio, so I kind of know how to talk into a microphone, but being on camera to me is new. But because I'm a visual guy anyway, and I make films, when I do these podcasts, hopefully I can show you some cool stuff I've done in the past and stuff we're working on in the future. So please subscribe, try to support what I'm doing here. And hopefully this will be an alternative podcast to the other ones that you get out there. There's some really great people out there. But I'm going to bring up stuff that perhaps others don't bring up. And generally speaking, I'm going to avoid modern politics and all this stuff. There's too many other really intelligent people, or not so intelligent, talking about that stuff. I'm going to focus more on the future and about how incredibly optimistic the future is, and also on topics like emotions. And I've made over 400 educational films. Maybe bring some of that knowledge back to remind people about the concepts of behaving in a way that makes their life as satisfying and successful as possible. Hopefully I can bring at least a little bit of that information. I'm a filmmaker, after all, not a psychologist, but a lot of the work I've done has been sort of psychologically driven. Many of you that are of a certain age group, probably below the age of... Well, I made a lot of educational films between like 90 and the year 2000. And so a lot of people watching this have seen my work. And then those that hadn't seen my work in the classroom, you've probably seen it on broadcast TV, whether it's American Idol, Ellen DeGeneres, the Extra TV show, True Hollywood Stories, MTV, HBO, Warner Brothers, BET, VH1. Yeah, you've probably seen my work. But I digress. I'm a film and television editor. I'm actually a filmmaker. I started in like 1976, and I got handed a Super 8 camera, and I got handed some black and white film because I was so damn depressed as a child. And I had gone from being a fairly popular, lively, happy kid to just sinking into depression in junior high. Junior high was not a fun experience for me. So my mom gave me access to her friend, the Spanish teacher at the junior high, who also was the gifted teacher, and they had the district, Gibsonia School District, had a Super 8 camera, and somehow she gave me a piece of black and white, a little cartridge of 3.5-minute black and white film. So I started making my own films, and this is right around the time that Star Wars had come out, and I had been inspired by that. interesting story. Actually, I bought the album for Star Wars about 9 months before I actually got to see the film because it was so difficult to get into Star Wars when it first came out. There were always full page advertisements of Star Wars stores, huge in the Pittsburgh Press, of sometimes 2 pages, and it would just say like Star Wars. It was incredible, the publicity. But every single showing was sold out of that thing. We had to go down to McKnight Cinema down on Route 19, which was, I don't know, 30 minutes from my house to watch it. And I wasn't as impressed by Star Wars itself as I was by the special effects. Certainly, I mean, I found the acting to be a little bit kind of basic and stuff. But ultimately, Mark Hamill became a better actor. But yeah, so it was really cool to watch Star Wars for the first time. But the music by John Williams inspired the heck out of me. And what was weird was that the album, like when you bought the Star Wars album, it would truncate things. Like the opening theme, there would be a splice right when you got down to Tatooine, I believe. Oh no, actually, where was that there was a splice? Yeah, maybe on Tatooine, I don't know. But there was a splice in the music, and then it would go to the end of the song. You know, that wonderful triumphant song, da 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 da, the theme, right? And I was like, man, they've cut it. I just want the raw audio because I enjoy that so much. So I started making movies by taking my brother's Estes rockets, which were these cool rockets you could put, little um, things in the bottom, and they would shoot up to the sky, and it had a little electronic igniter. And but you make sure it didn't have any rocket engines in there, and you hang it up by strings made of fishing line, and you put it in front of a black background that had pinholes in it, meaning a piece of cardboard. And then when you did that, you could film it. And ultimately, it looked pretty damn realistic. And as I evolved as a filmmaker in my early days, I got to start backwinding the Super 8 film. And by doing that, you could do superimpositions, and like you could literally go outside. You'd take some firecrackers, you'd empty them out, and you'd build a little flash bomb. Don't recommend doing this, by the way. That flash powder could blow up in your face. Don't do it. But you would then take one of the igniters I talked about, and you would put a battery outside. You'd roll camera, and then it would create this explosion that you could put over your spaceship. You had to do all this stuff in real time. Nowadays, of course, doing a superimposition is couldn't be possibly simpler using editing software, but back then it had to be done mechanically inside the camera. So that's where I started. And then I also started making computer programs. I was inspired by the adventure games of Scott Adams, and he got his inspiration from the Colossal Cave Adventure, which was a very popular uh, experiential adventure. And you would interface with it by typing north, south, east, west. You'd type inventory. You'd say get the lamp. You'd say light the lamp. You'd say shoot the arrow. And so you'd have simple dialogue interfaces with the computer. And I was able to get an Atari 800 computer. My dad sort of made up for, he was an executive in Pittsburgh at Koppers, right? He had come from Monsanto, believe it or not, and he came to Pittsburgh when they transferred to Koppers. But my father was a chemical engineer. He was a chemist. He was world famous, ultimately as a expert witness in chemistry. And in the meantime, my brother also was really interested in computers, and he turned me on to something called the TRS 80. So we had a level 1 in our junior high school. Then he had a level 2 at high school. So he said, "Hey man, we got this cool computer. You got one in your junior high, but mine's level 2." And I'm like, "What's the difference?" Well, level 1 didn't allow you to do things such as, I believe, string variables, meaning you had to limit your input, and your input couldn't be um, as complicated. So the user was limited to what they could type in. But when it got to level 2 in software, you could use the basic module built into the TRS-80 level 2, and you could do all sorts of manipulations with the strings. So I ended up developing some pretty sophisticated programs with my Atari 800. And so it had 16K of RAM at first. I had a job at Denny's as a busboy. I was a damn proficient, hardworking busboy. I worked as many hours as I could. And at $3.10, it started at $2.90 an hour up to $3.10 an hour. which is about the same you make when you're door dashing, isn't it? Sometimes. So, oh, by the way, I did the math, and I'm not going to keep digressing here because I am. Yeah, and when you DoorDash with inflation, it was like the equivalent of like 90 cents an hour that sometimes you make in 2023 as a DoorDasher. So that's a whole separate topic, which we'll get to. But I developed editorial technique, and I developed the ability to edit, and I began to wonder, what am I going to do? Because with Super 8, the way it's mechanically done is the picture head would be different than the audio head. The audio was delayed by a certain number of frames. So whenever you made a cut, like if someone said, "Hi," you'd have to wait like a third of a second before you could cut, because otherwise the word "hi" would be cut off, you see, because the "hi" was here on the film physically, and the voice was below the picture, which was up here. And so it really limited your ability to edit sound. And I wanted to do dialogue more than anything. I wanted to tell stories. Ultimately, my friends and I developed a film club, and we did some really funny movies together. A spoof from Monty Python. We did a spoof of spy movies. The third one is called King's Bane, which was a 50 minute Super 8 film. We did it in high school, and we had a cast and crew um, of like 50 people, 50 high school students. And then we also had an orchestra. Tony Centenary conducted some music that he wrote for the film. And so it was a 50-piece student orchestra with strings, by the way, that did some of the music in it. And so that was fun. That's sort of how I began filming with sync sound. And I got to appreciate it. And by the way, before that was the first film I made with human beings was called Pixelation, which is based on pixelation, which I read about in a book. And in high school, we didn't have any film classes. We didn't have any film clubs. We didn't have anything. So I learned everything from the various books I could buy, for instance, at Ritz Camera, where I got all my stuff from Super 8 splicing tape to my equipment and so forth. So at the same time I was making movies, I was making computer games. And my experience with early computer games was that it was very easy to fool someone into believing that the computer had intelligence. And what was interesting was that when I first used Chat GPT, I noticed that it was very similar to Eliza, a program that I had worked with when I was younger on my Atari 800 computer. Eliza with artificial intelligence, and you would talk to Eliza, and Eliza would analyze what you said and feed it back. It's not complicated to fool people. The Turing test is not as complicated, Mr. Alan Turing, as one would hope, because it's very, very easy to fool people into believing they're interacting with a sentient being, and in fact, it's a computer. So it's interesting. So after listening to the podcast of Lex Fridman, I was like, well, this is really cool. This guy is like really intelligent, but he's got this like dark motif and so forth. And what is this thing called a podcast? And then I stumbled upon Joe Rogan's podcast, and to date, I think I've listened to probably the vast majority of his podcasts because I find him to have a really interesting and unique talent and perspective on the whole world of podcasting. Um, it's interesting because my Grand Theft Auto is really depressing right now. There, I shifted it around. Here, I just want to show you guys something. While I'm filming this, I'm also looking at Grand Theft Auto, and this is something we're going to talk about, is the concept of a virtual world. There's Simon, my character, and he's sitting in a nice apartment, but it's raining outside, so it's depressing, and it's actually depressing me. Here, I'll show you. Look. See? It's all rainy and stormy and shit. It's like, is it still Halloween? It's not Halloween anymore. Why is it all dark? It's not normally dark like this. Oh, look, he's watching television. And we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about these virtual worlds and about where it's all going. I saw the recent podcast with Lex talking to Zuckerberg about MetaQuest and Metaverse. And I was like interested because I know Zuckerberg knows more than this, I think. although the imagination level is going to be different when you're talking as a computer geek versus someone from cinema television. But still, he was talking about the charming ability for people to get in a room together and have um, meetings together, so that you would have maybe an AI character sitting next to you, and you'd have a real person in flesh and blood sitting next to you, and then there'd be all these people that are in, you know, in the virtual world, in the metaverse, sitting next to you and sitting and talking. And or maybe you could just go sit on a beach and have a beer. And it's like, dude, that is the most boring shit I've ever heard of. Why would you want to do something so boring? And that's why people that are in the creative industries need to take this technology that people like Zuck create and then take it to the next level. Because um the idea of having a meeting with someone even now is not something that I want to do. The last thing I want to do when I'm in a meeting is to have my face on the screen and look at a bunch of other people in boxes. It's just dreadful. I just want to hear my voice. My voice can. There's a reason we have telephones. That Alexander Graham Bell was into this thing called a telephone. It's because you don't have to look at people, and that's not why he did it, of course. But would he have liked to be in the metaverse? Probably. Um, I just want to hear my voice. If I'm communicating, I would rather just communicate and the message I get across, not my facial expressions. But what Lex Fridman and Zuckerberg were going on about, which was that, okay, so their vision, at least as they described it, of the metaverse would be sitting in a room and looking at other people and listening to them talk. Blah, that sounds just hellish. My version of the future is at least similar to this. And this is stuff we created for um, our channel on YouTube. And this is me taking to, this is The Adventures of Kim and Simon. Kim is my wife's character. Simon is my character. We spent untold thousands of hours on GTA. And this is them experiencing life in their metaverse. When I first started playing with GTA, it was just stunning to me. Not just, of course, the graphics and the technology and stuff like that. Of course, that's cool. How could that not be cool? The graphics are amazing. I've had people, snobs, tell me, "Oh, it's not the best graphics." I don't care. I don't care if it's the best graphics. It's about the technology being used to bring you to another place. All right, and your character can experience it. But what was really interesting is that, like, when you played online with a bunch of other people, which I play online by myself and my wife, and with friends only. I don't play with the minions. You start to see just how it feels when, like, someone shoots you and you're like delivering your product. Just look at this. Look at this horrible weather. What the hell? What, are we still in? Are we still in like Halloween mode? I mean, because it's Thanksgiving, guys. Why? I don't remember it being so dark and nasty like this. I'm gonna go in the casino. When all else fails, go to the casino, dude. It's actually depressing me, and that's what I'm talking about. Is that people could literally live their whole life like this. Now, I've thought about it before, where you can like go to Paris, France, in a virtual world and have tea with somebody, and then as the advancements happen, perhaps you can even taste the tea. I mean, because we're going to be hooking up directly to the cerebral cortex. And possibly even other aspects, areas of the brain. Hopefully, not those areas that are uh, um, the autonomous what's it called, the autonomic nervous system, the one that controls things like breathing and heart rate. I hope that we never tap into that kind of crap, because here, I gotta go into the casino. So let's see what we can do here. I gotta do this like while holding the camera, so it's gonna suck. Here, go inside. Get in there, Simon. Get the fuck out of that bad weather. Jeez. All right. Autonomic. I mean, there's a limit to how. God, guys, I'm so scattered right now. I don't know what's up. There's a limit to how much. Uh, yeah, look, 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 look. Why am I still stuck in Halloween mode? Look, see this? It's November, November 17th. Why are we still having skulls falling from the ceiling, guys? It's depressing. I want snow. Grand Theft Auto, Rockstar, you little rascals. But playing with virtual reality, I also have done as a filmmaker. The future of storytelling is going to be you would go into an environment, and I was able to create some really friggin' amazing things with 32K was the most I ever had. 32 kilobytes of memory. Had to make everything very, very efficient, use machine language, subroutines, and all this stuff because there was just so little room. But ultimately, you really felt like you were there. And in the end of the story, in my story, you'd go around and there was this haunted house. It wasn't haunted, actually, was it? It was like it was more like a horror house. I don't think there were ghosts, there were monsters. And so you go into the house and you could really feel it as you go through the front door. And I think you find a basement eventually that you eventually find a key to, and you go down to the basement, and then the whole screen starts to pulsate, and it sounds like a breathing and a heartbeat and stuff with the primitive audio technology we had. And you'd go down to the basement, and you had to, I think, defuse a bomb or do something very carefully before the time ran out. And when it blew up, it was really devastating as an audience. And so that experience of going into these virtual worlds is very, very real. The imagination is a really important part, of the human brain. And so that taking advantage of that imagination goes into the world of editing, I think, more than it goes into the world of directing. And of course, directing, how mechanically things are done on the set. The best directors have pre-thought everything. The best directors can sit on their hands and everybody already knows what to do. That's the way a director should be, so good that they've already done all their work ahead of time and that things just sort of magically happen on set. By the way, that's the way it was working with Tyler Perry. So, and that's why I consider him to be certainly among the best, if not the best director alive today, because I admire creation. I admire the process of creating, and not just creating one film, but creating hundreds, if not thousands of films. Um, as an editor and as a director. And I think that experience makes you very, very valuable, especially if your films have been successful. Now, as an editor, I've edited well over 1,000 things. I think, I don't know what the number would be, but in the thousands professionally, and perhaps quite a bit more than that when you take everything in consideration, all the different films I've made. That's not bragging. That's simply telling you that when you're good at something and you do it a lot, you get damn good at it. Okay. And it becomes so subconscious that it's not just your cerebral cortex doing the work, man. It is every aspect of your being doing the work, and everything's very, very instinctive. Another podcaster that I really enjoy listening to for the most part is Jordan Peterson. Man, that guy's vocabulary is out of control. And a lot of it's psychological terminology and so forth. But man, I've never heard anybody that is so capable of wordsmithing on the fly as him. I'd have to go back to the writing of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson to find people that so carefully and elegantly, used words. But he does it on the fly, man, live. He was discussing comedy with Andrew Schultz, and they were discussing comedic timing in editing. And I wanted to pull my hair out because I really admired both of what they were saying. But then they started talking about zooming in and zooming out during comedy. And Schultz talked about how for his special, they averaged 1 minute of a special per day. And it's like, really? And that's just editing. I'm not judging. I got to see your special because that's slow. I'm a professional editor, and when I was editing comedy for Tyler Perry, for instance, Mr. Perry, man, if you didn't get 15 minutes a day done, maybe 10 to 15 minutes a day, you were really sucking. And even when you're doing ridiculous editing like for Extra TV, which I did for 11 years, you'd have to crank out 2 pieces a day. And that would mean a 3.5 piece in the morning, minute piece in the morning, and then another 2.5 to 5 minute piece in the evening shift. In other words, at lunch you break and then you take a little longer in the afternoon. In the morning you had to get it on the air, and it had to be damn perfect. And you're making decision after decision after decision. And every decision you make has to be perfect. You don't have time to go back and play things. You don't have time to go back and like play it from the beginning. Let's sit back and watch it from the beginning. No, F that. No, you would have to like make all the right choices as you went, and you have to be able to adjust it on the fly. And if you didn't get it done, man, it was going to be a black hole going on the air, meaning they would literally put it on the satellite as a black hole, and then they would have to feed your piece later. That never happened to me, thank God. But when they have to get the thing on the satellite at a certain hour and your shit's not done, then your shit's not going on the air. And maybe they'll give it to another editor to finish it. They know that the length of the piece is, let's say, 2 minutes, 14 seconds, and 19 frames, whatever. And they would make that whole in the piece. I hope this makes sense. Because when you deal with comedy is the most difficult uh, kind of television or cinema editing, followed by, I would say, suspense. Drama is the easiest. Yeah, drama is lazy. Now, when you get to good drama, like the stuff that's really good, I'm just going to randomly pick a movie. When Harry Met Sally. I don't know. Um, the Tom Hanks movie on the beach. I got to look it up. Castaway. Is that what it's called? Don't you hate that when you open a browser and you start typing and it's like, dude, obviously if I'm typing and I open a browser, I want to go to the search bar. What do you think I'm doing? What the fuck is wrong with you? Who designs these browsers? There. Tom Hanks Castaway. You know what's interesting? Yeah, called Castaway. Chuck Norland, a FedEx troubleshooter who was stranded in a desert. What an interesting concept that should have been so damn boring, but was, one of the most interesting films I've seen in a long time. Huh. All right. You know what's interesting? Speaking of keyboards. So I've got this shitty, basic little Mac keyboard because my Avid keyboard broke. And it's this little tiny little thing. I find it fascinating because the reason we have a QWERTY keyboard, QWERTY, QWERTY, the reason we developed this damn keyboard design is because the people that developed typewriters to begin with didn't want the typing keys to jam up, so they put the most common keys far apart. Did you know that? All right, but the point of the matter is that movies like Castaway are the exception. Woody Allen movies are the exception because those are drama that are every bit as intricate, every bit as frame uh, intense as comedy, but comedy is the hardest one. And I was the lead editor on the Ellen DeGeneres show. I was editing at Extra, actually, and so Telepictures knew about my editing at Extra. And Scott, the post supervisor, said, "Hey, there's a show, the Ellen DeGeneres show. Remember her?" And I said, "Yeah, wasn't she the one that was sort of canceled because um, of her lifestyle or something like that? Wasn't she like, wasn't she like someone that was kind of recovering from being attacked?" And I was like, okay, so I'll go to the Ellen show. And he's like, this is their 100th episode. Why don't you go over there and see what you can do? So they brought me over and like 2 other editors. The other 2 just dropped off the radar because they just couldn't hack it. Me, though, I guess I've got a knack for comedy and I've got this background of making films since the 70s and nothing will stop me, blah, blah, blah. So I go there and I cut their 100th anniversary episode, 100th episode anniversary, I guess you'd say. And it was interesting because that piece was about a 4-minute piece, maybe, and it had highlights of the last 100 episodes. And because of the rights they had to pay, because it was a union director and it was union this and that, the actual 4-minute piece was the most expensive piece I've ever cut. I believe the rights they had to pay out for that piece was approximately $110,000. Over $100,000 in rights for a 4-minute piece. Oof. But they liked my work, and then I began to cut their pieces that were the remote pieces. So Ellen would go out and she would do a skit and come back, do a skit and come back. And like one of the skits they had done prior to me coming on there, and by the way, this is the story of my editorial life. Yeah, it was on the floor. It was with an actor named Will Ferrell. And I was like, yeah, Will Ferrell's kind of huge, right? And no one could cut it because it was shot kind of, on the fly, amateurly. And as a good editor, you absorb all the footage in the same way that artificial intelligence learns and absorbs all of the data in the universe. And you literally watch the footage and your subconscious puts it all together, and you know that there's a different way to cut it. There's another way to cut it. Oh, that didn't work. There's another way. Because you have to create, especially with comedy, you can't make mistakes, meaning there can't be continuity errors. All of a sudden, you have to take advantage of any problems they have. So this is a piece I did for Ellen that was extremely popular.
Now remember, in tennis, love means nothing. Okay. It's different than life, where love is everything.
Ellen!
Will, hey!
Hi!
Hey, Will, hey!
How are you?
Good.
Hey!
With Will Ferrell. And forgive the low resolution. I don't have high-res copies of this. Plus, it was done back in the days of NTSC, which is 4x3 and all that stuff. The way an editor works is the same way that deep learning works. Meaning a good editor will literally absorb it. I don't know where they put it in their brain. I don't know where I put it in my mind. But you can just watch it, and you don't have to think about it. Maybe you'll make a note or two if something's very specific, but you just watch it, and you know how to put it together based on the footage.
Oh, don't be nervous.
I get nervous in front of big crowds.
We don't shoot with an audience.
What do you mean?
You've seen Gladiator, the movie? Well, the Coliseum filled with people, they weren't really there. They're CGI, it's called.
Right.
So that's what we do. We add the audience later.
Really?
Yes.
Great. All right, I'm excited. It's very exciting.
And the same thing with Tyler Perry's plays. So here's a play I did for Tyler Perry, and he would have a bunch of cameras. He'd have a crane, and it'd have like 5 or 6 or 7 cameras, and then you would have untold amounts of audio. You would have dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of tracks of audio, and then you'd film it in the course of 3 different evenings, and you have to cut it all together. Well, the actors are improvising on stage, so at one point they'll be on the left side of the stage, one point on the right, and in worst case, in some cases, there's continuity errors that flew past the crew. With comedy, I mean, it's a little bit more forgiving in a live play because everybody knows it's a live play, but still, you can't just jump. You can't do jump cuts. You can't make mistakes. Comedy has to be seamless. The actual art of the filmmaking has to be perfect. Even with horror or drama, you can make mistakes. With comedy, it takes you out of it. You can never let the audience out of it. But more importantly, I think what Mr. Perry really taught me when it comes to comedy was when I did his sitcoms with him. You have to allow the audience to laugh. And by audience, you can create a virtual audience, which I guess we did. So you have a laugh track, and that forces you to laugh. But he'd have to tell the actors, wait a beat, let the audience laugh. Even though you're in a soundstage with all these people and it's quiet, pretend you hear the laughter of the audience, because if you jump on a laugh, people don't get to laugh. I learned that in Ellen as well, and maybe that's why I was prepared for Mr. Perry when I got there, Tyler Perry Studios, is that, like, same thing. I would cut a piece, and then literally I would output the piece to tape. I'd walk downstairs. There's a huge studio audience in the downstairs stage, walk past craft services and the sushi and all that stuff they had because it was a union stage. And you'd walk behind the scenes. It was really cool as an editor to do this because I was a filmmaker who had worked on movies like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so I knew the crew. I knew how to behave around a crew. I was a crew member. But so you kind of avoid getting in the way of the crew, and you watch it, and you can listen to the audience, a live audience, Ellen DeGeneres' audience, and you'd listen to them laugh at your work.
Do you have any allergies?
Yeah, I do. I'll just have basic, occasional hay fever.
Oh.
And cats. I'm not great about cats.
Oh. You're
Great
allergic?
with cats. I don't hate cats.
Oh, there's nothing worse than... Well... listen.
you would observe that, oh, I could have let that laugh lasted longer. Generally speaking, it was usually that. Usually you get a bigger laugh than you anticipated. So you have to let the audience breathe. So you have to add these beats into your piece. So that's why comedic editing is so difficult, because not only do you have to make sure you don't make any technical errors, any continuity errors, you can't take the audience out of it, but also you have to allow them to breathe. Um, so it was cool listening to Jordan Peterson and Andrew Schultz discussing comedic editing, because they were talking about zooming in as the tension built, and they were talking about the tension of comedic editing. Comedic editing, of course, there's tension. That's exactly the point. So I really admire that, and I hope they get better and better at what they do. But I really want to sort of discuss that the art of editing is different depending on what you're cutting, and I'm getting a second degree. I've got a Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Southern California. I started at University of Bridgeport, then transferred in Connecticut, and I transferred to USC because I heard it was the best. Had a family tragedy happen in the interim, which really wiped me out emotionally. A separate issue. My mom passed away. So when she did that, that kind of effed me up a little bit, to say the least, like significantly emotionally. I didn't know what she did affect me that much. But imagine when you're 19, it has a big impact. And that was happening in the background as all this is happening. But I got over to USC. I got into the film school. Dropped out of the fraternity I was pledging, which I think was a result of my mom passing. And I really wish I stayed there because of social skills I would have learned. We'll talk about that in a second. But I ended up learning from some pretty cool professors there. And ultimately, by default, I became an editor at USC because you had to choose a crew position before you went on to your senior film. And editing was the most intellectual. And I started to learn the language of editing back then, and applying the ability, unlike Super 8, the ability to actually cut. You could L cut the audio, and you could actually cut away, like while someone's still talking, you could cut away. What a concept. Um, and oh, by the way, aside was they had an edit droid there that no one ever used. It was in a big room. Lucas's edit droid, which is a non-linear editing system. So they had laser discs that would all have the same material essentially burned on them, and you could then switch by computer and make your decisions that way. It allowed you to make those decisions in a non-destructive way. What that means is that you could then take that edit decision list and then conform the video masters or the film masters if you had edge code on there. And you didn't have to cut and splice and B-roll and all the stuff you'd have to do with video or with film, cutting and splicing it and saving the trims and having a team of assistant editors where if you want to make a shot longer, they would find the trim from the bin and they would have to splice it in there and make it longer. All of that creative process was so limited by the physical technology, the physical limitations of using sprocketed media. It was interesting because in film school, you didn't want to use video because it was such shit quality. You know, you had VHS to work with. Maybe you had 3/4 inch. The best I could find that I had access to was 3/4 inch and 1 inch, because back then that was the deal. So 3/4 inch refers to a tape that's actually 3/4 of an inch wide, 1 inch, so forth. And incidentally, if you want to look at the evolution of creating videotape recorders, I had the privilege of working with Jim Wheeler and interviewing him, and I made a little video that's very popular with people talking about the advent of the videotape recorder. Fast forward to today, though, anybody's phone can be an editing machine, And so the fact that it's easy to edit doesn't mean that people know what the fuck they're doing. Excuse me. Just like writing, the fact that we invented typewriters, and you could just press a key and generate the letter A versus taking out the cuneiform ancient writing techniques and trying to estimate that you had 3 sheep and you just got an additional 4th sheep and you had to add it up all together. Yeah. So ultimately speaking, we developed things that allowed like mathematics and writing to be a lot easier. Anybody can use a calculator, anybody can use a typewriter, right? Even a cat can type. Your cat will walk on your keyboard. But now anybody can edit. And editing is an art that you're either good or bad at it. But I mean, the technique and the knowledge of conveying images and story and pacing, and it's far more than just the technical aspect of it. A real editor is also the writer. In many cases, they almost become the director. And so that's why it's great to have directors that can write and edit as well, because you need to tell the story in such a way that you're making the most of the footage. And, I've always said that a great editor, or, give them a challenge, give them like a black video and white video and maybe some music and sound effects, and turn it into something interesting. You don't get any images, just you get to, as a exercise in skills, you only get to have like a black screen and a white screen. Now cut it together and make it cool, and then we'll see whether you're a creative editor or not. But even that will just tell you whether you're technically good. And there's something much bigger to editing. It's storytelling. And the concept of storytelling at first is mysterious. It's certainly ancient. The first stories I think were told over campfires. Um, there's a cave over the hill. I just encountered it. If you go to the cave, make sure you have a weapon or bring others with you, because the cave bear will kill you. But inside that cave is something that you want, like maybe there's some resource inside the cave. So if you want to get to it, you have to do. So it's like a story, or maybe there's a story about how the great gods came down. And they washed the planet Earth with a flood, and they created out of clay the first human. That's a story. So when you're dealing with cinema, television, storytelling through editing is a fundamental part of the art. I always thought it was weird that when you edit, you cut. So you cut, and you dissolve, and you do transitions, but you cut from person to a person to a person. What you're really doing is simulating, the human eye. When you're looking, like if someone's talking and they refer to uh, uh, a bird they just saw, you're going to look up at the bird, then you're going to look back at the person. And because of the way your mind works and the way your eyeballs work and the way your optic nerves and your optic cortex, your visual cortex process the information, you don't notice the little movements or the big movements. It's all, you just cut in your head. You're cutting. So your brain is literally editing in a way. That's what their brain does. And interestingly enough, the brain is a prediction machine, and the visual cortex is a prediction machine. Everything you see is imagined, because due to survival, everything is delayed by maybe a sixth of a second. So if you actually waited to see something until it actually happened, you'd be bit by the snake, you'd be attacked by the mountain lion, the bear, the lion, whatever. So your brain predicts constantly. What you're looking at is a prediction of the future. You're looking at a movie. You don't actually see what's really happening. One way to actually simulate that is, so Explore the World is this really cool app that I like, and I use it when I'm riding on my little exercise bike, right? And what's really cool about Explore the World is that this is a weird experiment. So if you project this to your screen, which I do, and you're immersively going down the Mojave Desert or whatever in a virtual two-dimensional world, and you come to a complete stop, you'll notice that the screen breathes. I haven't heard anybody else say this, but you notice it's so literally like your mind is predicting what you're about to see. And then when you stop, your mind goes, oh, and you'll see it shift backwards. Check it out if you can do it. You'll see it shift backwards because your brain was predicting what you're about to see, and then something happened you didn't expect. And by the way, the same thing I believe is how magicians do their work, because they're getting you to predict what's going to happen visually, and then probably in less than a sixth of a second, if you did the math, they do something unexpected. So you literally don't see it. You're looking at the world through a processor. Your brain has quite a few dendrites, apparently, as part of your neocortex and as part of your brain. And these are little computers, many, many of them, that get formed as you think. And thinking is hard. And the reason it's hard, in my opinion, is because you are literally growing dendrites in your brain. You're literally growing new connections in your brain. And that actually is exhausting. What, 20% or something of your energy, your calories go to your brain for a reason. Your brain is not this static thing. It's constantly growing and creating, and there's so much activity going on in it. And, in computers, they don't physically grow things, right? You don't physically grow a new processor. It's fixed. It's hardware. It's not software. So I recommend the book Thousand Brains Theory of Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. And it talks about how thought is spread across the brain and a new concept of how thoughts are put together. He introduced me to the concept of dendrites. And so they're like little computers inside your head, and then you vote. So the subconscious mind, and I'm not putting words in Jeff Hawkins' mouth. This is my interpretation. That what is conscious is just what you are experiencing or what you're choosing to experience, but what is subconscious is so much bigger because your brain votes. And at any given moment, you're having thoughts. And not to be morbid, but for instance, like, let's say you go to the edge of the Hoover Dam and you look over the edge and you go, oh my God, I just thought what it would feel like to jump over the edge. You don't actually jump over the edge. That's not going to be a good result. Or perhaps you see someone that you don't like what they said and you envision smashing them in the face with your fist. Or maybe there's a beautiful person and you envision kissing that person, or whatever. These things aren't actually acted upon, and maybe these thoughts are things that you might, feel weird about and you want to suppress them, or you want to amplify them. That's the whole point, is that you, as your conscious mind, are relying upon all this different inputs from different parts, not only of your environment, but of your mind, voting on things, democratically voting on things. And we'll talk about this in a future podcast, but there are ways to tap into that subconscious thought. There are ways to actually use your mind as a feedback machine, and the techniques you can use to get good answers. Should I take this job offer? Should I say hello to this person? Should I exercise right now? Should I eat this fig Newton? I don't know. You can vote on these things in your mind. You do it all the time. And the process of understanding that is the process of starting to know the machine that you're inside, which is a biological machine, which is your brain. Now, as we move into artificial intelligence, I would like to see that sort of thing happening on a machine level. And I think we do. I think that's called a neural network. But where you are able to tap into that voting mechanism a little bit and have the machine, artificial intelligence should be called machine intelligence, have the intelligent machine make decisions based on sort of, maybe take a little longer to make the decision rather than spitting out some inane, inaccurate thing the way ChatGPT and the others do often. But think more about it and take everything in consideration. We're not there yet in the slightest. I mean, for me, the state of the art when it comes to chatbots and so forth is obviously phenomenal and it's breathtaking, but it's a little bit smoke and mirrors, guys. You know that, because like I said, Eliza back in the 70s did some of the stuff that modern chats can do. And once you learn that that can happen, you are less impressed by it, particularly if you have to program it yourself, which I sort of did. I created my own little Elizas. It's not that hard. You analyze the sentence, you give feedback. And so don't be fooled into it. I want to talk about working for artificial intelligence in the future. And as I'm making my transition, and I went back to school to get a science degree, and I moved out of Hollywood. I got kind of sick of Hollywood, so we relocated. And so in the meantime, I had to learn how to get some gig work because all of my normal work seems to be taken by people that I've never met before, or maybe with a hell of a lot less experience than me. I don't know what's going on, but the editorial job market has completely shifted because everybody knows that everybody thinks they can be an editor now. They don't understand some of the things they would learn after 20 years of doing it. Maybe they've got 2 years of experience and they're pretty good at what they do. But one of the things I would like to start to do is invent technology that would essentially replace those editors using machine intelligence. No, nothing offensive to those editors, but um, this kind of technology can be used. For instance, I was even looking at the Joe Rogan podcast. Joe Rogan's amazing. He's a really good interviewer. I've learned a shitload from him. But I've noticed when I don't know how they do their cutting, but they're making bad decisions. Um, you and I think a machine would know that. When you're doing like a talk show, that is the simplest kind of editing. Why? Because there's only one take. In a podcast, it's a talk show. Okay. There's only one take, so you can't like find alternative takes. You can truncate something, you can cut away if there's an emergency. When you compare that to something where you've got an almost infinite number of choices you can make, and and editing is a constant decision-making process versus just simply cutting from Joe talking to Jordan talking to Joe talking, you know, they're not getting that right. Okay, there's a pacing involved, and the use of reaction shots, the use of um, lingering shots, the ability to let the audience laugh, the ability to open yourself up to the audience if you're cutting to a third camera, God forbid. These are only two camera shoots, and they're not editing them correctly. So part of the reason I'm getting a science degree is that sort of level of editing should be done by machine. It's not complicated. And especially when the machines start to analyze people's expressions, and the machine could ultimately do a better job than the average person because it's going to find when someone's got a really cool reaction shot, it'll see it. It'll watch their face, it'll watch their eyebrows, and it'll cut for you. And it'll also use techniques by learning from great editors, by analyzing thousands and thousands and thousands of edits. It'll learn what works and what doesn't work. What you would have to tell it, of course, is this is successful, this got high ratings, this got low ratings, people turned off here. You'd look at the uh, the feedback of the actual edit. You'd look at the analytics and you'd see where people turned out. Why'd they turn out right here? Okay, why'd they turn it off? Why'd they change the channel at this moment in the podcast or this moment in the TV show? And it would analyze that. And that's what we're going to be doing with data science. My company, TrueFilm, is developing that technology, and I'm looking forward to people connecting with me who are also interested in the concept of automating the editorial process. But by the way, I want to emphasize the fact that we're dealing with two dimensions, not three. So it's not 3D, it's 2D. So, and you're dealing with a limited space. You're not going into the shot. You could zoom in. You could push in a little bit. You could make it larger. You could pull back if you're shooting at a high enough resolution. You can make the image bigger, because if it's a small image and you make it bigger, there's nothing there, right? There's edges. So if you shoot something, let's say in high resolution, like 4K or 5K, as opposed to just standard 1K, which is HD essentially, then that allows you to zoom in, zoom out, and push in and push out, and punch in and punch out, meaning you don't just zoom, you cut. Um, all these decisions can be made fairly easily by a machine because you're only dealing with two dimensions. What's going to get really crazy is when you can get up out of your chair and walk over as an experience. You can walk over to the other person, and that to me is interesting, where you can go to the Paris coffee shop and you can change seats, or you could get up from talking to someone. Let's say on a virtual level, you and Ellen DeGeneres are having coffee and you're talking to her about our talk show, and you stand up and you and Ellen walk into the kitchen, and now you're talking to the chefs. You're talking to the chefs in Paris, France, and you got to grab a translator, or it translates. All of a sudden, you speak French, and it's translating it for you. And then you decide that you're both going to, or that she's going to stay in the kitchen and have some escargot, and you're going to go outside and you're going to press your button and a spaceship's going to land and take you up into outer space. And then maybe you want to go into another dimension. So you're going into a multidimensional universe. Now, see, that's going to be something that really needs to be edited with the assistance of machine intelligence. And also, by the way, again, we're just talking about linear storytelling at that point. And everything right now is linear. What does that mean? When you play a show, yeah, you can fast forward to a different part of the movie or you can rewind, but you can't literally expand something. I want it to be nonlinear. So this technology that we're trying to invent is nonlinear so that you can actually go beyond a two-dimensional storytelling and expand things, contract things, shift things, experience things in a different way, change the weather at a whim, change someone's appearance at a whim. Your avatar, and this is why I get back to Grand Theft Auto, your avatar becomes very much a part of you. And with all the dystopian talk right now about identity, every kind of identity that Homo sapiens right now are going crazy about, and we're having massive discussions in academia and every other level about people's identification. I don't see a problem with the concept that as we move towards an avatar experience, meaning you're living in your virtual world, why can't you be whatever you want to be? Hell, I'd like to be taller. I'd like to be younger, perhaps a different hair color, which I've tried over the years. At one point, my hair was purple back at E Entertainment when I was a lead editor at E. And anybody that worked at E would know that I was the purple-headed lead editor there, along with a couple other really brilliant people. So I don't want to say I was the lead, like Dean Permay was brilliant there and a few others. But I was the go-to guy, especially for E! True Hollywood Stories, until toxic mold took its toll on my house. And that was part of the reason my hair was purple. But in these avatar situations, you don't need toxic mold to have purple hair. You can just shift it. And it's similar in Grand Theft Auto when you can change your appearance, right? You can identify as whatever you want. It doesn't change who you are as a person, but others won't even necessarily know who you are. It'll be like the Darth Vader syndrome, where when you finally took the mask off of Darth Vader, for some reason he changed from James Earl Jones, right? The voice of Darth Vader turned to this pasty, fat, white guy with a bald head. I don't know how that happened, but that's cool. It was weird to see the man behind the curtain. Same with the Wizard of Oz, obviously, although he wasn't pasty. And it was actually the opposite. With Wizard of Oz, it was the opposite of Darth Vader because he looked like a pretty normal kind of cool guy versus the wizard looked like a scary, he looked like the scary guy that was inside Darth Vader's helmet, didn't he? Yeah, whatever. Hey, you Star Wars people. Empire Strikes Back was the best Star Wars. Can I tell you why? Because Irvin Kershner was my friend for like 11 years. And we'll talk about that in future podcasts too. So I was really good friends with Irvin Kershner. He helped me start a company. He helped me start this educational video company. He started in educational films. God bless him. He passed away years ago. But I learned so much from Kershner, Irvin Kershner. I learned so much from the man, and I consider myself a good friend. On so many levels, he was a great mentor to me. And we'll talk about that as the season progresses here. I guess my time's about up. I'm Richard Arsenault. Thanks for tuning into this podcast. I'm still learning as I go. And together we can explore the galaxy of possibilities. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe. God bless. We'll talk about God later. Thanks for watching.